I still got the boot on.
We need the sword though.
How many more weeks or?
Soon.
Soon, good. Soon and very soon.
Well, greetings everyone. We're in a new time.
Yes.
Want me to get extra Bibles on?
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Thank you.
Where's Nacho?
Nacho had a situation with his wife. She's pregnant, and she called him home. She said she needed his assistance, and so he's a good husband. He took off.
He laughed. That's good.
Last week, Nathan. It's my grandson, Nathaniel.
Birthday.
Just like the prophet.
Oh, excuse me.
Last week, Nathan was asking about swords. You mentioned something about swords, right? What was your question about swords?
Not the they're gonna bring the
You were that's about.
You got instant response.
You got response.
Lord.
I was going to talk a little bit about the plague, the 10 plagues of the Egyptians. But we can do that next time. I wanted to share this with Nathan. See? You're going to help me. You have to correct me.
Hey, you.
Nathan. Okay, when the gladiators, when people wanted to be a gladiator, you know, anybody that wanted to be a gladiator could try out to be a gladiator. It wasn't just slaves. Sometimes they would put slaves in there. Lots of different people wanted to be gladiators. Why do you think they want to be a gladiator?
to get money.
One thing they could get, they got fame. They got a chance to get out into the arena and fight. And everyone, they loved to hear what? People cheer their name. Yes, exactly. Just like who does that today?
When I beat George, I'd feel that way. At tennis, which is not very often.
Do you jump over the net?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. It was that last time that taught you.
That's right, yeah. I learned my lesson.
Well, similar to the excitement that athletes get, it's the same thing that the gladiators would get. People would be cheering, these huge crowds would be cheering their name, go, 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 go. And so they had to go into training. They would go through a basic training, and one of the first things they got was a simple wooden gladius like this, very simple. Before they even got that, they would have to go through a lot of physical training, just like calisthenics and exercises and all kinds of stuff like that.
The wooden sword can still kill people.
It can. You know, you can, just about anything can become a weapon. So you got to be careful with it. But they used a wooden sword like this, and they would practice their techniques. And as soon as they graduated from that, when they would go into a gladius like this. Now, all of these are reproductions. None of these are real. These are reproductions of what the real ones would look like. The real gladius usually didn't have quite as fancy handle as this. This is more for ceremonial type activities, like if you're riding in a parade. But you can tell the difference. This is a stabbing sword. And you can tell it because it's very narrow right here. See how narrow that is?
And on the side,
short.
And on the side, you can hit him and break their bone.
Well, you could hit him, but this is not very sharp over here. It's almost flat right here, because it's designed to do this, more of this. Now you could slash them, you could slash down like this, but if you did, you'd want to try to hit more out here. But it's more designed for this. Close proximity. When you're fighting somebody, you're really close to them, like the distance I am from George here. You're really close. And what they would do is they'd bring, if they were going to fight at a distance, they'd use a spear that they would throw. They had shields. They'd lock shoulder to shoulder with the shield. They'd have a shield. Of course, some were right-handed. They'd have a shield like this. And if George had his sword in his right hand here, I had my shield. We'd be standing like this together. And they need to have a sword here, and we do a row of men like this, and we'd march together. And each one would protect the other one. Now, after they got done, now you can compare that to a broadsword. This is a sword that would have been used by a Templar knight.
It's not for letters. It's not a letter opener at all.
No.
That's a big letter.
Feel the weight of this.
Don't pull that thing out.
Feel the weight of this.
Oh, Oh, wow.
These swords could weigh up to 30 pounds. This one's a light one. This
Jeez.
one's only about 9 pounds.
30 pounds.
Yeah. Very wide here. If you watch the movies, Conan the Barbarian or some of those movies, the piece in here is, you know, very wide, very thick. This sword here is in here, very small, but the whole edge here is sharp. Now, why would you do that? Because this is a slashing sword.
Yeah.
You slash down like this.
It's a claymore.
Claymore, or also known as a broadsword. Now, George, could you help me out here? Be my horseman.
He's already got bad.
Be my horseman for me. If you just stand right
He's
there, please.
going to take care of that leg for you, George.
Put your neck down on it.
Put your
Now,
leg
if you're
up.
riding a horse, you're up at least this high. So when this is in the holster of the horse, see, it's clear. It's not going to hit the ground or anything. I could wear it myself. Look how close it is to the ground. It's not very good. This is kind of a sword that you'd use riding a horse. Now, if I was swinging this, now if a horse is running about, how fast is a horse? Just a nice trot.
15 miles an hour. 12.
15 miles an hour?
12.
20 miles an hour? Fast horse can do 30. You imagine this thing swinging at you at 30 miles an hour?
Wow.
This would cut through a lot of stuff, you know, even armor. So that's one of the tools that this was used for when the Templar Knights, when they were escorting, that's what a Templar Knight did. He would escort Christians, usually to Jerusalem. He'd be protecting them. So if bandits come riding at him, he could turn his horse around and take out his sword. You know, stay away from these pilgrims. I'm escorting them to Jerusalem. But if they kept coming, well, you're in for a dangerous fight. Thank you, George. Now this sword here is the sword used by Egyptians. And it's a little different. It's called a scimitar. And it looks very much like a tool that is used for doing what?
Cutting wheat.
Cutting wheat, like a sickle, isn't it? Very much like a sickle. That's probably exactly what they mimicked it after. And this is the sword that the Egyptians used. Pretty heavy, isn't it? And if you watch the movie The Ten Commandments, you don't see this sword. This is the sword that they used. In fact, when Yul Brynner told people to charge, if he would have held up a sword like this, he'd have been wrong, wouldn't he? Because this was a Roman sword and was copied after the Greeks. He should have held up a sword like this. But he didn't hold up any sword at all. He held up an arrow. Now, this was the first sword that was given to a gladiator, but after the gladiator fought in the arenas and after he won a lot of fights and proved himself, the emperor, if the emperor was impressed with him, he would call him forward and say, "You don't have to fight anymore," and he would offer him this sword again and say, "Now you are a free man. You don't have to fight anymore," and generally also a palm leaf. And he could leave the arenas and never have to fight again. Now, he's kind of like a star, like an athletic star. And you know what they usually do when they are no longer participate in sports?
News commentators.
Well, they're kind of celebrities, though.
Celebrities.
Yeah, and they endorse stuff. And that's the same thing that the gladiators would do. In fact, when a gladiator, when he showered, shall we say, they didn't really shower. They kind of, sometimes they got into bathtubs, but what they usually did was kind of steam themselves, and they took these kind of tools that looked like a back scratcher, only it was flat, and they would scrape themselves. They would scrape the oils and sweat and everything off themselves. Well, some people said, "We want that because that's from you," and they would put it, and they said, "Well, I'll sell it to you," and then they would put it in perfumes and other
Gross.
stuff and sell it. And sometimes women would even buy it because they thought it would make them have babies. Yeah. So he would go to places and they would give him things because he's a celebrity now, and they would offer him three things, but he had a pretty good life afterwards. So what do you think, Dad? Can I offer him a sword?
Sure.
Are you a hero? You're now a hero.
You can have that sword as long as you use it carefully and don't use it on your brother or sister or your friends, okay? As you just said, it can still hurt somebody even though it's just a little piece of wood. And now you have an interesting story to tell them, don't you? Now, one other thing, after a hard day working as a gladiator would be hungry, wouldn't he? Very hungry after he showered and steamed himself and got a massage and everything.
Need some Gatorade.
And he said, I want something good to eat now. I'm hungry. So if he was a gladiator of means, he could have special desserts made for him. Dessert here is one that the gladiators wouldn't have eaten. However, we're the gladiators. When we talk about gladiators, what part of the world are we talking about?
Rome.
But this is not a dessert that actually came from that part of the world. Stubborn.
It's more Greek, maybe.
Yeah, exactly right, George. It's in fact, if you go to Greek restaurants now, you will find this dessert.
Gladiator pie. No. No, maybe not.
Gosh, I can't open that. I need a knife.
I don't know where you find one.
Okay.
What would they call it in a Greek restaurant? Is it baklava?
No.
Doesn't have
No, this is just, they would just call it Greek yogurt. Or Greek yogurt dessert.
Look at that.
I was going to offer it to everyone, but since nobody wants food today, it's still an option if you guys want it. I can pass it around. Decide.
You can pass it on.
Pass it around.
We have some beautiful fruit down here.
Looks like they were
Kind of nuts.
Milk and honey.
Honey and nuts too?
Anybody else
I
want
know.
something?
We're good. Cookie thing.
We had a cookie.
You had a cookie. Okay.
We're glad your S's.
Okay. This format, the way the class is right now, I mean, if you, well, we're going to do this for.
What happened?
Sour.
Oh, sour cream.
No, that's
it's
sour
yogurt.
yogurt.
Sour yogurt.
So now you have a taste of what, now you have a feel of what the gladiator would have held in his hand, and you've got a taste of what he would have had after he would have been in one of his battles.
But what did the gladiators have to fight? What were they fighting? Animals or people or
All of the above.
all of the above?
They fight lions.
Now
Lions?
sometimes, yeah, sometimes they would, there's kind of some misconceptions about gladiators. Number one is everyone thinks that Christians were all just hoarded right into the Colosseum and slaughtered. And that's not true. In fact, there's probably no Christians were ever killed in the major Colosseum. Christians were killed, Christians were sacrificed in the games, but usually those were in the arenas that are in the neighboring areas. The gladiators usually fought against each other, and when they did, most of the time, they did not kill each other. That's also a misconception. They went in there and there was just this blood-crushing, massacre, and it's not. There was actually a referee in there. He had a big pole, it was probably about 3 or 4 feet long, a decorative pole, and he'd stand between them and stop them from fighting. And, if there were specific rules for engagement, and of course the emperor, and there was also the emperor's decision on to kill somebody or not. There was also the crowd's encouragement for action, and that was often taken into consideration. But the referee actually got in between them and would stop them from fighting. And so you kind of have to imagine as a boxer, a heavyweight champion boxer, or NFL football players,
or wrestlers.
Wrestlers, yeah, yeah. I mean, talking about the expensive real athletes that engage. You can see that in modern times, if there's an injury or something that goes on, that they stop them because they have an investment in these guys. If you just let them get trampled and killed, there's a big investment loss. Yeah.
In the Coliseum, they did fill it with water and do both albums. They
did, yeah. Yep. That was one of the amazing things about it, to be able to fill it with water like that. It wasn't filled very high, but they did fill it, yeah. And so the athletes, in fact, the losses of gladiators was only about 10%. Yeah. The major gladiators, the first line gladiators. Now, anybody else who would just say, I want to get in there and fight too, and work their way up to a point where they actually could fight against the gladiator, they could be killed. That's number one. And those are the kind of people who would say, I want to do something exciting in life, and that would be the kind of person like, I would put them in the same category as like the platform jumpers in our 20th century who, risk their life to do something exciting. They jump at a very low level, have these sports parachutes, but a high percentage of them die. It's like, I don't know, it's like 30% have major injuries or die.
The base jumpers, right?
Base jumpers, yes. I said platform, base jumpers, that's the title, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous sport, and it's just the same thing. If you're not at the level of these guys and you work your way into their arena, there's a high chance that you get killed, and that's what happened to them.
It's like people running the bull in Spain, huh?
Yes, and there were people who deliberately wanted to become a gladiator, but weren't always good enough, but had enough connections to get in there, either financially or politically or whatever. There were also the criminals. Criminals could be ushered in there. Now, the criminals usually had no or little experience in fighting like that. They could be soldiers, they could be just guys that were just criminals, and they end up fighting and most of the time dying. And so, I mean, you could see where some people in the state might think that this is a good way to get rid of them anyways, because we get entertainment for the people, and we get rid of a problem. So let's do it. Toss them out there,
Worst case, they get away and go free.
Yeah, and they
And
probably.
that's a low percentage.
Yeah, that's very little chance. I mean, most of them had no weapons, and there's very little chance. And then there was the animals, the exotic animals, and sometimes they would bring the exotic animals from all over the world. Now, this was a very difficult job, and they had an animal wrangler or manager to handle all of those animals. And he oversaw all the animals to make sure not only did they get paid for or captured or whatever they had to do, and transferred all the way to Rome. And they had, of course, get there safely and be healthy enough to fight. So you had this tricky balance of keeping the animal wild, but keeping it healthy. You know, so you want something that's a man-eater, but you got to have it wild enough and fed and healthy enough to get there.
And hungry enough.
And the thing is, and that's important because a lot of these animals weren't man-eaters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even some lions and tigers don't necessarily want to eat people. You know, usually they just want the people to get out of my way, get out of my house, leave my kids alone, leave my family, get out of my, you know, just don't bother me, and I won't bother you. I won't run you over, I won't bite you, I won't do all this, claw you, all those things. Just get out of my way. So they had to train the animals to want human flesh.
To attack. Huh?
Yeah, so they had to go through a process of slowly training the animals to actually go after human flesh. So once they got the animals here, then they could put a crowd of people, and sometimes it was Christians, yes, and sometimes it was slaves, sometimes it's just thieves, whatever, put them in the middle there, and then rush the animals out. Now, did they always run right towards the people and eat them? No, because what would happen when the animals run out? The crowd would go, yeah, and the animals would go, whoa, what's that? You know, that's another thing I don't know what it is. So you see all these big old bold lions running out there and get about halfway out and then doubling back and running back in. Well, then the crowd's going boo, you know, they'd usher, they'd, you know, move all the slaves off of the thing, or the criminals, whoever's out, they'd move them all out of there, and then they'd bring the animal manager out here. Your animals didn't perform.
Oh.
And guess what happens? Yeah, he got this.
Yeah.
Then the crowd would cheer again, and they drag him off, and then bring on the next event.
The only successful people were taxidermies, huh?
So it wasn't a good job. You wouldn't want to be. You've been, you know, got some good news and got some bad news. You've been promoted. The bad news is you're animal wrangler, you know, or animal manager. So, anyways.
I went to the animal family.
Yeah. Now, how does this tie into our study in Isaiah? Well, as Paul was bringing the message of Jesus Christ to the Romans, he wrote the book, well, he wrote many books in there, letters, but he wrote the book of Romans. The book of Romans kind of is, and you've probably heard this, the Roman road to Christianity. It's kind of a guideline. It kind of lays out the path for us, gives us important information on becoming a Christian. And many people compare that to the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, that it gives you important information about our relationship with God and how to have a relationship with Him, how to avoid the problems, see what other people have done, see where you can learn from their mistakes, and how you can grow in becoming closer to God. And so that kind of ties the two together. Okay. So right now, we are, and again, I hope all of you kind of have a critical eye of the format of what we're doing here, because I want to hear from all of you. If you want to continue doing it this way, if you want to modify it, if you want to add things or subtract things, please let me know. Right now, we're still in chapter 49, and we're at verse 20. And what I'd like to do is go from 20 to 26 today. So, George, you want to read from 20 to 26?
The children born during your bereavement will yet say in your hearing, "This place is too small for us. Give us more space to live in." Then you will say in your heart, "Who bore me these? I was bereaved and barren. I was exiled and rejected. Who brought these up? I was left all alone. But these, where have they come from?" This is what the sovereign Lord says. "See, I will beckon to the Gentiles. I will lift up my banner to the peoples. They will bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters on their shoulders. Kings will be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. They will bow down before you with their faces to the ground. They will lick the dust at your feet. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed.
In our conundrum.
Can plunder be taken from warriors, or captives rescued from the fierce? But this is what the Lord says. Yes, captives will be taken from warriors, and plunder retrieved from the fierce. I will contend with those who contend with you, and your children I will save. I will make your oppressors eat their own flesh. They will drink on their own blood, as with wine. Then all mankind will know that I, the Lord, am your Savior, your Redeemer, the Mighty One of Jacob.
Okay, I have copies of all my notes. If anybody wants copies of my notes, and I'm just passing them out, just let me know. Okay? Okay, verse 20. The children born during your bereavement will yet say in your hearing, this place is too small for us. Give us more space to live in. Well, what are they referring to here? What's going on with the people in the people of Israel?
I want more.
They want more. Why do they want more? What happened to them? What happened to them that now they want more? They became captured. They became captured. They're slaves now. That's right. And well, we want to be careful with the word slave. To us, the word slave has a derogatory meaning, doesn't it, Doug?
There we go.
Doug and I were
Just like
talking about the how easy it is for a word to move around in a culture, to be one culture. In fact, easily within a generation can take on a whole new meaning and be confusing. In our culture, the word slave, you instantly think of oppressive behavior, being taken against your will and put into situations where you have very little freedom, and then sometimes you're abused and beaten and mistreated. Where in the Bible, people, where in the Bible, sometimes a slave is a good thing. A person, in fact, Paul wanted to be the slave of Christ. He makes a reference to that, and because a slave can be a person that's taken into a family and almost treated like one of the family. They can love the slave. They can offer him all kinds of benefits. And in fact, they can, in some situations, Scripture tells us where people have the opportunity to no longer be a slave. They would turn around and say, no, I want to remain with my master. I want to be a slave. So the circumstances were much different than the ones that we think about in early America, where the slaves were treated worse than animals in some situations. So here we have the children saying that in this situation, this is not a good one. They don't feel, they're not happy here. They've been taken from their home. When Babylon took them from their home, why would they take them away from that part of the world? Why would they break up a society like that? If you've conquered them, why don't you just send your soldiers in to occupy them, like they did, like in France, and during World War II, the Nazis came in. What did they do? They occupied France, right? They set up their own kind of government, and they just occupy it. So why didn't the Babylonians just go into Israel or Judah and just occupy it?
I'm just guessing. I don't really know. Would their motivation be to change the thinking of the people? If they brought them to Babylon, they could make Babylonians out of them, because they would generation or so, all of a sudden they would be thinking that way. They wouldn't be thinking their old way. I don't know, just guessing.
It's possible, but if you're going to look at Jews, if you're going to use modern Jews as an example, and see what's happened to them now, how they've been moved around all over the world, from this situation, do you think it's affected them?
Well, I think it was God's will, first of all, even though they probably didn't like it. God wanted diaspora to spread the word. I don't know.
Well, and the Jews, you're using an example that they didn't change, they didn't become like those that they were living among. I think I've taken into consideration they were God's chosen people, and so he might have prevented what would otherwise normally have happened.
Well, what usually happens when a group of people move or migrate into another country or culture?
Integrated.
They usually assimilate, don't they?
That's what
Generally.
That was my original point, was that the Babylonians' intention to get them to assimilate with them.
Yes.
You know what happened? The Babylonians became more respectful of and more thinking like the Jews over a period of time, which led them to give them permission to come back to their land.
The one idea is to get them to assimilate, and when they assimilate, the cultures kind of blend, don't they? They kind of start to mix a little bit. I remember when I was working as a counselor in a clinic, the director would go out and she'd reprimand the office help, and she would say, "Don't speak Spanglish. Either speak Spanish or English, but don't speak Spanglish." Because you could hear them, sometimes they'd be talking in Spanish, and then they'd switch over to English, and then they'd switch back to Spanish. And I asked them one time, "Why do you switch back and forth?" That's why it's easier to say some things in one language and some in another. But that was part of being in the culture here. They were in America, prominently speaking English, and you've got that switching back and forth. But there's another issue too that's going on here with breaking them up there from Judah, pulling them out. When you have a culture that was your enemy, and they have key people there that are either very intelligent or leaders or have maybe technological understandings, you can pull those main people out, and now all you've got is more commoners, should we say? Followers, workers, instead of the leaders and the scholars and all that. You pull those people out, and you just take that group instead of the whole group, and you bring them over here, and now, like I think the Russians would say, we're going to re-educate you,
Well, after the end of the Second World War, both the Russians and the West were pulling out the intelligentsia, the engineers from Germany, and bringing them. Von Braun was the prime example, and his group, because they wanted the technical knowledge, not because they were trying to change cultures. I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm sure they weren't. But Germans decided on their own to change the culture.
Yeah, that's another thing that they can do. Well, they can do to get a technological edge, but if that's their motivation, to get a technological edge, because we don't want the Russians to get a technological edge, so we'll pull the scientists, so we get the technological edge.
We don't want to rebuild a warring nation either.
Yeah, and but in this situation, the chances are they were pulling the people out, the main people out, to stop the resistance, that there would be no one to petition or lead these people to war against us anymore. We would supply the leadership for them, and they will follow us now. The interesting thing with the Jewish people, though, they kind of assimilate. In other words, you have like German Jews and Polish Jews and American Jews and all these different Russian Jews. You have all these different countries they went to, but they always remained Jews, didn't they? And the interesting thing about Jews is that being a Jew is a religion, and it's also their culture. It's who they are as a people. You don't change that. You know, even if you become part of another country, you don't change who they are, who they came from, and that's part of that chosen people part. And I think you said, Ed, that they were also, George, that said that they were also God's people bringing God's message. There's a kernel of that in there as well. So that's a very interesting thing that happened here. There's a disbursement of God's word by the actions of the enemy.
Yeah.
We're going to break you up so we can stop you from warring with this. Whoops, we just brought you over. We just brought your culture and God's message over with you. Because what is the first thing they start to do? They start to teach their kids the Torah. They start teaching them the law.
The story of Daniel.
Okay. You know, they start with the little games to learn Hebrew, move them into the stories. And, you know, the interesting thing about Hebrew is that it's such a multidimensional language. We just don't see it when we read this stuff like this. We really need to study the Hebrew, because when I'm studying Hebrew, I can see these words and the meaning to them, because in Hebrew the language is much smaller, and when you have fewer nouns, they have to mean more things, and so they connect these whole stories to words. So you've got this multi-layer. So you're like, when we read this here, we're seeing just like the glass here, the writing on the glass. But the thing goes way back through here. You know, it just goes, you start studying each word on each name. It just goes right on and on all through their history. You see all this connection. So that's the exciting part, that when you read a line like this, what's really going on, the depth of all of this. So the children born during bereavement are the children of the Jews who will, sorry, I'm probably going to have a reader. Children born during bereavement are children of those Jews who have been deprived during their dispersion into other lands. Now there's children that are crying out, we want to go back to our homeland. We want to go back to our homeland. And here they are, they're crying out back then. 700 BC, they're crying out. And you know, it's a funny thing when I was listening on the news and I heard the Palestinians saying, you know, this land is our land. Jerusalem, in fact, the newsman said that Jerusalem used to be the capital for Palestine. Never in history was it ever. It was a backwash. The Palestinians never cared about it. They only care about it because the Jews care about it. And here it says it right here very clearly that they want to go back. They want to go back home. This is not where they're supposed to be. This is not their land. This is not where they're supposed to be. The oppression of being a slavery is crowding them in because they're supposed to be back home in Jerusalem. There is insufficient space for all the Jews to live in, so they beg for more space. And this is cross-referenced in Zechariah 2:4.
So they get the West Bank, huh?
Yeah.
Golan Heights.
And the Golden Heights.
That's what I was telling my Jewish friend. I said, you know, I love Jerusalem, I love Israel, and I said, I rarely ever disagree with the decisions made by the government there, but there is one decision that I disagree with them that they make occasionally. And he says, you know, he was very solemn. He says, what's that? I says, when they try to give land for peace. Don't give land for peace. It'll never work. There's not enough land until you give them the whole thing. They want the whole thing, you know.
It's a small country to begin with.
Yeah, it's so tiny.
When we were in Israel, the war had just ended a few years before, and our guide was telling us, there's the Golan Heights. You know, if the Palestinians control the Golan Heights, they could hit any target in Israel with their cannons,
yeah,
or with their guns,
yeah,
because the country is so small.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they were screaming because they put up those walls to block the suicide bombers, and they have to. The suicide bombers, since they put up those walls, have dropped It's
Almost totally.
yeah, almost totally. It's I don't know. It's more than 90%. I don't know. Now there's been some consequences of that because people who were had shops and stuff along there, you know, they've lost out. But I mean, if you compare it to our town, you know, if somebody was bringing in suicide bombers into Camarillo and blew up families and a store and stuff like that, you better believe there would be people putting up walls and stuff to stop whoever came in.
Well, we
to do
already
that.
have on the Mexican border.
So he's talking about Camarillo.
But it doesn't,
Well,
you know, when
same-
yeah, the closer it gets to home, all of a sudden your views start to change a little bit, you know. Okay, 21. Then you will say in your heart, who bore me these? I was bereaved and barren. I was exiled and rejected. Who brought these up? I was left all alone. But these were, where have they come from? Now Zion is addressed as an afflicted widow, bereaved of her children. And remember who Zion is. Now, Zion can have several meanings as well. So you have to use the context here of Zion referring to Jerusalem. And there are times when the church is desolate and few in number, yet its desolations shall not last forever, and God will repair them. So it's making a cross-reference here over to the church. God will rise up, friends, by returning Israelites even among the Gentiles. They shall bring their children and make them their children. And this is cross-referenced many times in Isaiah, and Isaiah 29:23, Isaiah 47:8, Isaiah 5:13, Isaiah 68, Isaiah 1:8, and in Psalms 142:4. Has anyone got their thumb in Psalms? You're closest to Psalms, aren't you?
Can somebody pass me an apple juice, please?
There you go. Psalm
123:4.
142:4.
142.
I need more coffee.
Here, I'll pass it on.
Making heavy now.
My God.
Go for it.
Look to
George
my-
has it.
Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. It rhymes.
Yeah.
I have no refuge, no one cares for my life. Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge, no one cares for my life.
Now, what does that sound like to you?
That's
Sounds like an orphan.
It does.
David's
Yeah, it sounds
really
like-
afraid,
Yeah.
depressed.
Yeah. So what he has done is and this is a good thing that he does this, because when he makes that realization that the false gods that he was worshiping are not there, you know, that's the reason he's in this mess in the beginning. That's the reason that the people of Israel are in this mess, is because they turned to false gods. They were not loving and communicating with the true God, and so they turned their thoughts and hearts and minds to the pagan ideas, and they got away from God. And now, then the foreign armies came in and took them over, and once that happened, then they looked to these foreign gods, and they're not there. It's empty. It's empty. And of course, the true and living God is not there. Why is he not there? Because you didn't open your heart to him.
Rejected him.
You rejected him. That's right. I got a T-shirt that says this boy. It's supposed to be a letter to God, and he says, God, there's so much violence in schools. There's shootings and killings. Why aren't you there? And on the back of the shirt it says, don't you know I'm not allowed in schools? I had a woman stop me in the bank and said, that's amazing. Where'd you get that shirt? Because it's true. It's true. As soon as you turn your back on God, he's not going to force you to believe. You know, that's not a loving relationship. You know, I don't drag my kids in by the collar and say, you better believe in who I am. I'm your father. No. You know, you want to have a loving, patient, nurturing relationship with them. And that's reciprocated. And so now, when they're in trouble, you know, What did it say, George? Read it again.
Oh, I lost it.
No, that's okay. It's okay.
Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge, no one cares for my life.
Yeah. He looks to his right. The right is always considered in the direction of the holy.
Yeah, he's back in the cave now.
Yeah.
He's doing that.
Yeah. He's looking to the right. There's no gods. These false gods are not here, and the true God is not here. Who moved? Okay. All right, 22. This is what the sovereign Lord says. See, I will beckon to the Gentiles. I'll lift up my banner to the peoples. They will bring your sons in their arms and carry your daughters on their shoulders. God will give the signal, raising his hand or a banner, and the nations among which the Jews have been scattered will respond by releasing these displaced people, bearing them home like small children. Cyrus and Darius will be involved in this, as it shows in Ezra 15. And we got a cross-reference in Genesis 15:2, Isaiah 11:10, Isaiah 11:12, and Luke 15:5. Why don't somebody look up Genesis 15:2 and Luke 15:5?
I've got Luke.
Okay. Okay.
And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. Luke 15:4.
Yeah, you really need to start with
Yeah.
verse 3 and
Yeah.
go on, because
Yeah.
it's Jesus telling the parable. Suppose you had one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does not he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it?
Yeah. I can see why he jumped ahead a little bit, but it is important to get the context there. Anybody find Genesis 15:2?
George did.
What do you got?
Go ahead.
You got it?
55, from 5 to 6.
15, verse 2. One verse.
2? So,
Okay.
do I have to read?
You get to read
You
it,
don't have to read it.
special
You don't want to.
privilege. You get extra credit for reading.
It's okay.
You want George to help you?
Yeah.
It's okay. But
That grandpa-
15:2.
Good old George.
Well, kind of. Let's see it.
15:2. Okay. I'm good.
It's good.
But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Izlard of Damascus.
And get it?
all right. Well, the point still remains that God is going to deliver those people, and he is going to be like Jesus said. He's going to be extremely happy. He's going to be celebrating. He's going to be putting them on his shoulders, and look who has come home.
So who's Eliezer of Damascus? My note here says Eliezer was Abram's most trusted servant, acting as household administrator, chief servant, etc. according to custom, if Abram were to die without a son, his eldest servant would become his heir. Although Abram loved his servant, he wanted a son to carry on the family line.
Kings will be, let's see what time is it? Okay. Kings will be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. They will bow down before you with their faces to the ground. They will lick the dust at your feet. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. Lick up the dust as a token of humble submission of the vanquished foe, just as the serpent in Genesis 3:14. I think there's a reference there. I think that's, isn't it in Genesis 3:14 about the dust, issue of the dust with the serpent. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Those who hope in me will not be disappointed. Those who remain, and it says hope in me. Faith. Keep your focus on the Lord. Keep that faith. That's the hardest thing. I heard a news commentator on one of the talk channels say that, well, he actually had a guest on there who had written a book that says that he understands how God works. He understands where God came from. And it all comes from our brain chemistry. That the reason we have God is because we need it, because the way our brain is organized. And so, therefore, we create this God, and we create religions, and we create everything around it to support it. And now I figured it out, so everyone, you can leave your churches and not bother anymore. And the guy said, okay, thank you very much. Okay, have a nice day. I hope your book sells. Goodbye. And he said, I'm trying to believe in God. I'm trying to believe in God. But this guy didn't help me one bit. I said, well, good, at least you're on the right path. He said, because, first of all, if he's coming from an evolutionary perspective, if we started off so many thousands, millions of years ago as proto-man, and we developed this idea of a God to get us through that, well, we've already passed thousands and tens of thousands of years. Why haven't we dropped it by now? Why did we bring it all the way through with us? I mean, he's talking about we weren't walking upright when we first got this idea, and now we are. Well, we lost all those other features. It seems that we would have lost that a long time ago, especially as we start moving into a more modern age, That doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, you throw the whole idea out. It's the whole premise is silly.
It's like forgetting who's pulling the cart.
Yeah.
Or the clay says to the potter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why are you making me like this?
Yeah.
But we forget that the horse is pulling the cart, and we think because we're driving the horse in a direction that we're controlling the horse, but it's the horse's power that's taking us where we want to go. It's not the cart.
Yeah. Some of these ideas, and it's very simple. It's one of the earliest concepts you learn in apologetics, is just taking the concept to its ultimate limit, taking it as far as it would go. If you take a concept, somebody throws down a concept to you that, God doesn't exist because of this reason. Say, okay, let's take that reason and do one of two things. Let's either open it all the way up like we do a clock and look at if all the parts make any sense, or number two, let's take it to its ultimate limit and let's see if it still makes sense. And 90% of the time, with just using those two concepts out of Christian apologetics, the idea will fall apart. And that's exactly what this guy did on the radio. Bless you. And we're pretty much out of time.
Well, there's so many ways that people who do not understand an invisible God, a God beyond circumstances, they will use any little jab to kind of get you off your point, to kind of shake your foundation. People will do that, and yet they have no concept of what they're talking about.
And You know, this can bring us full circle. Just like a Roman gladiator. Nathan, if you're a Roman gladiator, what do you have to do every day?
Work out, train.
You have to train every day. And Christians, we have to train every day. We have to be sharp with our apologetic tools, because any chance Satan gets, he's going to come in with one of his swords and try to get us. So we've got to keep our armor in place and our swords sharp. So let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for the blessing of this day. I want to thank you for your love and mercy. I want to thank you for your word that helps us keep our armor in place and our sword sharp, and keeps us alert to all of those things that try to tear us down and take us away from you. This message in Isaiah, Lord, reminds us exactly what the consequences are when we let that happen. When we move away from you and start looking at the foolish things that Satan wants us to look at, that are all over the world, that moves us away from you, then we fall. Our armor falls off and our swords get dull, and we're vulnerable. And then when we look around and we can't figure out why we're in trouble, then we have to stop, and we have to look to you. And we have to humble ourselves, and we have to pray. And we know that we can come back to you because you're a loving, merciful Father. And we thank you for that. Thank you for the great blessings you have bestowed upon us. I want to thank you for those blessings that are going to be given to us. Help us to glorify you in every way. And we ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are those notes?
These are the notes. Oh, absolutely. You want one of each? This basically be what will be projected when we do that. So I can give you one of each.
One for your cup.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Graham. And keep moving. A white tornado. That's it. Well, maybe.
Watch it under here.
I have more stuff here than Carmen has.
Your weapon to yourself.
It's only 99 degrees in Orlando.
Thank you.
But the humidity is 110.
Good, that's good.
Where's our trash barrel?
Here.
Walking and
Thank you.
walking.
It's a walking trash barrel. Can't wait to enter into that next Wednesday.
Oh, it'll be so
Don't mind if I
great.
do.
Welcome.
Go for it.
Class dismissed.
Here are
I
Martha.
see
They're in
an
reverse
orange
order.
juice,
Okay.
in front of you? Yes, I did.
Take one, too.
Don't talk. It's all right. You don't have to talk.
I'm so glad you're in this class because you're so smart.
I used to have one every morning. Now, I just take it as an exception here. That's a lot less than usual.
You're such a good boy.
Next to you.
Ho, ho, ho.
You're making an exception too, huh?
Can you have to switch?
Can I do what?
I have to switch.
Oh, right on it?
Nathan collects artifacts.
Good reflexes. Try and stand on one foot for 5 seconds.
I know, back off a little bit.
He has. That's me speaking like man.
You make hard decisions, you. Don't distract me. You're not playing fair.
I was trying.
That's good, that's good.
Because he's got others.
That's great.
Okay,
You see it okay?
Oh, is
Yeah.
that right?
So
are you free to go?
And
Oh,
a
you said you have to go work.
You
have a good week, yeah. I got it. Saw it last night.
really.
Yes, this is the right place. You have come to the right place. Yes, they go in. You say pretty good.
Also, it's not like today. It's set back.
Yeah, and it's shot that way too, during World War II stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a,
It's in part
like an extreme.
You are, my friend?
So it's like Indiana Jones, where he's kind of like he's just a guide taking you through the history. Kind of the same.
It is is it application? Yeah.
Through the time.
Yeah. I got application.
The people don't think you're
Yeah. I appreciate that,
I
George.
just reading his book actually.
Are you?
Yeah. And the ideas come out of there. It's kind of finding out what.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
What is
I
it?
appreciate that. Well, the doctor said they're
Well,
continuing
that's
to
what I think,
regenerate,
but you start looking at
and
history
what he's trying right now is some steroids on it, and
When
he
he starts
wants to
talking
make
about
sure
polio.
that
And he dismembered that area.
either react or don't
His
react
idea
to
was kind of
someone
putting all
else will try
that
to go
together
with the
again.
drugs. And
See,
he says
we
we're
get our
going to
views
use a
from
certain type of drugs
Jews
that go into
and
surgery,
things,
so
so-
we need to know which ones we can use and which ones we can't.
But if you look at it from the Germanic perspective,
Went and see him again
It's
for
that
4 weeks, and
we,
we're
as
going to be using these
Germanic
drugs to
Jews,
see how they react, and
I
alliances
was just stressed in this.
dismembered or separated the
Surgery might not be
Germans.
possible.
You know, through Austria, the Bavarian.
Aversion.
And so
yeah.
you
and,
start seeing that.
well,
Because in the beginning, with the
theologically, I
revisionistic-
worked through the idea.
You look at history and what it
In the Old
says.
Testament,
It's like
it makes
facts.
it very adamant that we're supposed to
That's why he
not
didn't
be
destroy France.
involved
That's so
with
much
things
harder.
that are
And there was this
dead
lesson.
or decrepit, and so I researched that. I
interesting.
thought I need to
It's very
research this to find out
Vision
what
when they,
how they define that.
in the beginning,
And I need to know where the line is drawn.
There's some apple juice that are
And
this
since
orange
the tissue
juice.
that they will be putting into my
it
eyes,
did.
it comes from a person that's just
Put on a
died,
bowl
but
where
the tissue has to be kept alive.
the thing is a
So
little.
if the tissue is kept alive, then essentially it's not decrepit. It's not
It's
dead
only one.
as far as scripture would refer to it. So the
Yeah,
moving
yeah.
tissue that's been donated by
Which one do
a
you
person,
want?
deliberately donated, that's still alive, and it's moved into my body and kept alive. So that's what I had to confirm. And so once we got now we're past theological stuff, now I'm moving into the pharmaceutical.
You have that, you have what you take.
Literal.
Yeah,
I'm not everything.
Good class today.
Thank you very much.
it's fantastic.
It's a fantastic system.